Talking about innovation is so important today because we are living in a world of faster and faster change. Thank you so much, Ben. And I want to say welcome to all of you. It's always a joy for me to be with Sun Devils. I had to learn how to do this. Am I doing it right? Yes. So, as I said, I am really glad to be here, and I'm so glad you're here. Are you glad you're here? Yeah, all right. Wow, this is great. We don't get this in England where I live. They're much more reserved. So if you are, in fact, glad that you're here, I would invite you to welcome each other for a moment. So turn to somebody near you, and I would invite you to look them in the eye, say, "I'm so glad you're here," and then give them a high five. And don't leave anybody hanging, so you could do this more than once. Go ahead. You are so awesome. You are so awesome. This is great. So what we're going to cover today is 3 common beliefs that can hold you back from innovating, the single most important condition for innovation to occur, and then 4 strategies that you can put to work immediately after leaving this room and see results. So talking about innovation is so important today because we are living in a world of faster and faster change. So if you and I are not innovating, then we are at risk of falling behind. And the thing is that organizations, and Josh mentioned this too, have this natural gravitational pull toward conformity. And conformity is the enemy of innovation. And on top of that, there are some limiting beliefs that most of us hold. And as I go through them, I wonder how many of these you recognize from your own organizations. So myth number 1 is that only some of us are capable of innovation. It's really something we should leave to the creative types, the right brain people. And the problem with that is it really reduces the number of people that feel they can innovate. It holds us back, and we start to think, oh, well, that's not for me. I really couldn't do that. And so we leave a lot on the table as organizations and as individuals. And in fact, the truth is, we are all innovative. We were born to innovate. And it's really a matter of how much freedom you give your teams, how much freedom you give yourself. And just as one data point, I was reading this study that talked about how kindergartners could come up with more ways to use a paperclip than senior executives. So myth number 2 is that innovation is the work of a solitary genius. The truth is, nobody does this alone. And let's look at Thomas Edison, who is one of the greatest inventors, and he had thousands of patents. Well, he had an entire lab. It was a team effort. And Edison's genius was being able to spot ideas that had potential and then building a team around that idea. So innovation really is a team sport. And it can be counterproductive to leave innovation to one brilliant mind or one small team of brilliant minds. And when I was back in my investment banking days, I had 24 years of a career in investment banking, most recently as chief operating officer for Europe for a big global bank. And I remember that we had a product development group with a really smart guru. And those of us who covered clients started hearing about this great new product that a competitor had developed. And we went back to our guru and said, hey, can we have our version to sell to our clients? And he said, oh, that thing, yeah, we looked at it last year and decided it was really a stupid idea. Well, we ultimately did get our version of it, but only after $1 billion worth of the stupid idea had been printed away from us. So myth number 3 is that innovation is a function of a light bulb moment, that it kind of like Venus from the sea, right, in a clamshell. The idea bursts forth, and the entire solution, perfectly wrapped, arrives in an aha moment. Well, the truth is, it takes a lot of time, energy, experimenting, and hours of researching, discussion, thinking, prototyping, and so forth. And I like the saying that it takes years to be an overnight success. So the reality is every organization has untapped capacity for innovation. And that, unfortunately, we can't just legislate for it. We can't just demand it and say, okay, by 5 o'clock on Thursday, we are going to innovate. It doesn't happen like that. Instead, what we need to do as leaders is create the conditions so that innovation can emerge. So what might those conditions be? There are a lot of conditions that have been found to be important. And as I go through this list, I want you to think about which is the single most important one of all of these important ones. It could be a diversity of ideas and thoughts, cross-pollination of those ideas. Maybe it's psychological safety and trust. Perhaps it's having the support systems and resources available to innovate. Maybe it's having the right people or talent in the room. And maybe it's giving those people the time that they need to innovate. Well, if you said psychological safety and trust, you would be right. And in terms of psychological safety and trust, this was something that came out of a study that Google did about teams. And what they found was the most successful, highest performing teams are those where there is psychological safety. And academics define the two terms this way. Psychological safety is a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, and that there's a climate or culture where we feel comfortable to be ourselves and express ourselves. And so it's a group dynamic at particular points in time. Trust, on the other hand, is the expectation that we have that others' actions in the future will be favorable to our own interests. So trust is more between individuals or between organizations, and it is not time-bound. Now, it turns out that both of these concepts, they're very similar, and both are important, and you can have one without the other. So, for example, my colleagues and I, back in my investment banking days, we each individually trusted our boss. But when our boss convened us all for our regular morning meetings, none of us felt psychologically safe to admit to any issues, problems, vulnerabilities, all right? So just to give you a sense. And since both of these are so important and they're so similar, I would like to have your permission to use the term trust in the rest of our talk to encompass all of it. And the question then is, how can we create this safe space of trust? And to me, this is really about culture. And my favorite quote about culture is from Judith Glaser, who is the founder of Conversational Intelligence. And Judith says, to get to the next level of greatness depends on the quality of the culture, which depends on the quality of the relationships, which depends on the quality of the conversations. Everything happens through conversation. And Judith Glaser's work was about bringing neuroscience, brain science, together with leadership to help leaders build trust so that we can get extraordinary results, to get those innovative results that we all want. So let's talk about where trust resides in your brain. Well, it turns out it resides primarily in the front of the head, in the prefrontal cortex, and that's in green. That's also called the executive brain. It's also the newest part of our brain. And that's where empathy, judgment, decision-making, and innovation reside. On the other hand, distrust rests in the amygdala, which is the oldest part of our brain. And here it is in red. And it is, Seth Godin calls it the lizard brain. And it's the part of our brain that kept us alive in prehistoric times, because when you looked at an animal, you had to be able to tell immediately whether it was going to eat you for lunch or the other way around. So when we have conversations with each other, we change each other's brain chemistry. And what we say, how we say it, and how we are with each other can either push us toward distrust or pull us toward trust. So let's talk about this whole brain chemistry in the context of this conversational intelligence dashboard. And so when your brain is on the red side, then it's filled with fear chemicals. Sometimes your brain can be in the green side, where it's filled with positive connecting chemicals, or it can be in between. So let's talk about some of those spaces. So when you're in low trust, you're sort of in that red and orange zone. And you might start out as being a resistor. Think about the person who, think about that product guru, right? He was a resistor. He said, no, I'm not going there. Or you could be a skeptic in the orange. That's the person who's sitting in the back going, Or, depending on how the conversation goes, you could move toward wait and see, which is where you have conditional trust, as in trust but verify. And then hopefully you can get over, through your conversations, to the blue, where you're starting to build higher trust levels. And Judith Glaser calls this being an experimentor, as in the mentor of an experiment. And so you're willing to proactively try new things. And then ideally, for innovation, we want to be in the green zone. We want to be where we are sharing ideas and discovering new ones. And that's called co-creating. So when you're over on the red side, and have all those fear brain chemicals going on, then your natural instinct is to protect. So it's all about the I. And it's only when we get to the green side that we feel open and we feel comfortable and confident to be ourselves in that safe space of trust, where we can really start to partner. And that's where the beautiful innovation can happen. So the thing is, you as a leader have the power to shift yourself and others from one side of this dashboard to the other. And we'll talk about a couple of ways to do that in a moment. But I just want to also say, because you have the power, you have to remember to use your power for good, not evil. And I know we can trust this group. Okay, so at different points in time, we're all going to be either a red leader or a green leader. I know when I'm tired, stressed, impatient, I show up as red, all right? And the sartorial choices have nothing to do with this talk. It's a color that most Chinese people really find to be fortuitous. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So we really can't help ourselves. But the key is to be aware of when we are being red and when we are being green, so that we can manage ourselves toward the place we want to be. So a red leader is someone who puts people in a threat state. So you are putting people on high alert. And oftentimes, when you're in the red zone, then you're going to find yourself telling people what to do, telling people what you think, telling people what they should think, and then selling your ideas to them, convincing them that you are right. And then when they don't immediately fall all over and say, yes, you are the solitary genius, you then say it louder and more powerfully. And that's called the Telcel yell syndrome. It's a very one-directional thing, and it really puts the receiver into the red zone as well. So you end up in what they call amygdala hijack. So your amygdala, the lizard fear brain, has hijacked your entire brain, and nobody can innovate. On the other hand, a green leader is the opposite. A green leader puts people in a partner state. makes people feel comfortable to share ideas and discover new ones. And therefore, everyone can be in flow. You're really ready to co-create and innovate. So the question is, how do you do that? So as I go through these, I'd like you to start thinking about which of these do you already do, and which of these would you like to start adopting? And I'm going to give you a chance to ask some questions about them before we wrap up. So here are 4 strategies for you to be that green leader who can really bring out that culture of innovation in your organization. Strategy 1, words create worlds, because language matters. I still remember the time I was sitting on the trading desk. It was lunchtime. The big boss, so this is my boss's boss's boss, comes over to my desk and says, May, I need to talk to you. Come see me first thing in the morning. Well, immediately my shields go up. My amygdala has hijacked my brain. I'm completely useless for the rest of the day worrying about what did I do wrong? Am I about to be fired? Well, it turned out the next day I walk in and he's got a cool new assignment for me. On the other hand, I want you to think back to the way we first started. When we said, I'm so glad you're here. Did that make you feel more red or more green? Yes, exactly. Words create worlds. All right? And there were a couple other things going on if you want to ask me about that later too. So you want to be aware of your words and choose them really carefully. So here are a few of red versus green combinations that I'm going to share with you. So instead of no but, why not try yes and, which comes from improv. And the whole premise behind improv is the name of the game is to support each other. Instead of starting your questions with why, try starting them with what. Now, why can be a very accusatory word. Like, why did you do that? Why were you late? All right. Whereas what, even though it's a little harder, takes more brain activity to come up with a reframe to start the sentence with what, that sounds a lot more opening and inviting. Like, oh, what were the concerns you had when you made that decision? So, why did you decide that way, right? It's like, what were your concerns? And then instead of, oh, we can't, try what if. What if is one of the best innovation questions because it opens up possibilities. And what if our assumptions were incorrect? What if we could do that? What if we tried X? And another innovation question I really like is, how might we? So those are all opening words. Strategy 2 is to hold open the space for brainstorming. So one of 2 things usually happens when we brainstorm. Either we spend so much time coming up with new ideas and surfacing cool new thoughts that we run out of time for next steps and nothing happens. Or we are in such a rush to find the solution that we don't end up surfacing all of the rich ideas. And the role of a green leader is to hold open that diamond, hold open that space so that we get a balance of divergence of ideas and convergence. Because innovation is about not just having the ideas, it's also about implementing them. And you do that by asking questions and listening. So you're facilitating the conversation. You don't have to shoulder the entire burden of being that innovator yourself. Strategy 3 is to encourage experiments. So my definition of an experiment is the smallest possible action you can take that still gives you information about whether or not you are on the right track. And that allows you and your team to do a lot of experiments because they're so small, each one, that none of them are betting the farm. They're not betting your career, they're not betting the company. And I have Albert Einstein on here because I love one of his quotes, which is, I didn't fail, I just found 10,000 ways that do not work. So your job as a green leader, your job as a green leader is to allow people to experiment and allow them to get it wrong. Then to support them in moving their experiments forward and support them in trying again if things don't quite turn out the way they expected. And then to celebrate not just the wins, but also the attempts. A lot like what Josh talked about in terms of the red and the white marbles. Then the fourth strategy is to use leadership moments. Now, a leadership moment is a moment when what you do or don't do, what you say or don't say, will fundamentally shift the trajectory of your culture and your outcomes. And there are 3 types of leadership moments. The first type is right up front. And that's where you want to ideally establish and agree as a group what the rules of engagement are. How do we want to be with each other? So that could sound like things like, we're not going to interrupt each other, no interruptions. Or it could sound like equal airtime. That's a really important one for psychological safety and trust. Or it could be no mobile phone. So you can come up with the rules of the road that you want. Then the second type are episodic. All right? And as a green leader, you want to be on the lookout for those, because those are moments when you need to step in or consciously decide to not say anything in order to uphold the culture and values. So most of the time, it's going to be you stepping in, you intervening to uphold that, the values. So as I was thinking about this, it reminded me of when I was junior on the trading floor, and one of the senior traders just was screaming insults at one of the junior team members. And we were terrified. And we looked over at the head of the department, who was just sitting 10 feet away, and he acted like nothing was happening. And so we knew that nobody was safe. And then the third type is ongoing. So you have opportunities every day to role model the behavior of a green leader. And you're always on stage, so that gives you dozens of opportunities every day to decide to show up as your very best green self and to bring that out in others. And you don't want to miss those opportunities or waste them. So now we've talked about the 3 myths and how they are harmful. We've talked about the single most important condition, and we've talked about the 4 strategies. We have just a couple of minutes if you want to ask any questions before I do a wrap up. So does anybody have questions? And then
Thanks, that was great. I wanted to ask you, or just clarify about the fear in the workplace and the amygdala hijack. Mm-hmm. So really, basically, if you're operate in a culture that perpetuates that, you can't create or collaborate or innovate, right? Because of the brain science that says that. Is that accurate?
Yes, and it's all about the how and the degree. But when we're in that kind of shutdown, it's very hard for us to innovate. So yes, so it's really important. And I want to also just add that you have micro cultures as well, which is why you don't have to be this, I'm going to use a very highly technical bond market term, you don't have to be one of the senior muckety-mucks to go, oh, well, he or she isn't allowing me. No, you can create that for your team. You can be that green leader and create that safe space. Thank you.
Hi there, thank you for your words so far. My question is if you have an example or anecdote of taking these principles and maybe applying them in the opposite direction. So I believe you coach as well. So what I'm asking is, how can you influence upward the people who some of you have mentioned that don't behave in
yes.
the kind of way that we're trying to encourage? So.
Right, that's a great question. And so, yeah, you have some agency in that, and you want to do this carefully. And one of the keys is to start building relationships with those people beforehand. So the more you have a relationship with them, the more risk you can take with doing something like that. So the two ways that I found really successful are one, you can prime senior people to help them create this environment of trust by going to them beforehand. So it's all about the setup, it's all about the prep, and all about the upfront. And talk to them about what kind of environment they would like to create. And then most people don't come in and saying, you know, I really want to be a jerk today. I want to put everybody in red. I want to have that amygdala hijack going full blast, right? They don't want to be like that. And so it might be that they don't realize. And so I love the idea of finding out what their aspiration is, and then having that be the common goal, and then you can start to coach upwards, say, well, you know, I've observed that when you do this, as in catch them being good, right, it really opens everybody up. And so get them to do more of the good thing. And then you might say, you know, and would you want to know one more thing that I think can sometimes work against the, I'm sure you're not aware of it, but something that's really simple that might work against the kind of brand you want to convey, and they're all going to be, yeah, I want to know that. And then you can say, well, yeah, it's just when you dismiss Dorothy's ideas all the time. I think, you know, something like that. And the second way is to ask open questions in the session. Like you could if they haven't called on Daryl, you can say, well, you know, we haven't heard from Daryl yet, and I know Daryl is a jazz performer. I think he might have some interesting insights. So you can just artfully help the meeting that way. So I see that we are at time. I'm looking at my handlers, and I'm going to respect my handlers. So thank you for your questions. And I would just like to close by saying that when it comes to creating a culture of innovation and trust, it's really up to each of us to take action and take some responsibility. And that we really have the power to do quite a lot more than we might think we do. So the question for you is this: what will you do? What will you do to create a culture of innovation in your organization? And I'd like to invite you to just choose one thing. And unlike Josh, I'm not going to let you off the hook. I want you to actually do that thing. All right? I want you to pick a really small thing, but commit to doing that and step up into the green leader that lives within you. And with that, I'd like to also invite you to stay connected. Email me. I'd love to hear the action you take. You can follow me on social media, follow my blog. And my great love for all that is ASU and the Sun Devil community, I want to leave that with you too. And thank you for being such a wonderful, wonderful audience.